Hello, it's Dan the Real Estate Guy coming to you again from my home office. So today I want to talk about a package buy that both my partners and I made back in the 1990s. Remember, the way we envision this training is training and learning on actual deals that are going on now, but also training and being inspired by some of the transactions we did over the years that may become possible again right now. Some of these will be possible very soon. Some of them probably already are possible in your neighborhood. All right, so you maybe don't have the knowledge for this yet, but I want to show you another neat transaction and how it came together and give you an idea, probably more importantly, kind of bend your mind a little bit to open it up to the possibilities. Because you have to realize, when I did my first little deal, maybe you watched that little funny transaction in Abilene, Texas that I did, then I moved here and did lots of transactions. Even I didn't really imagine the 280 unit complex at that time, and maybe I would have if somebody would have showed me what had happened to them. They started off with little deals, they did some bigger deals, they did some package deals, they did some big deals. I didn't think that way too much. I was just busy trying to make things happen. All right? So by letting you know some of these transactions, at the website we're going to have the core training lessons, which will be shot right here in my home office. We'll have some on-site location shoots, which will be on actual transactions that are going on now for you to learn about and to learn those lessons that every transaction provides. Remember, you learn from every transaction you do. The whole setup here is to allow you to experience lots of transactions without having to do lots of transactions and to risk lots of your money or somebody else's money in most cases. So you're going to learn from every deal you do. I'm still learning after 1,000 transactions, but this should speed up the process. When you do your first deal, your second deal, your fifth deal, it shouldn't feel like your first deal, your second, or your fifth deal. It should feel like you've done more because you've experienced transactions through these videos, hands-on. You saw the lessons that are being learned. Some of those lessons are current in today's market and you need to watch out for them, or you'll already have the solution to some of them, and that's very important. But today I want to stretch your imagination a little bit as to what could happen to you in your area. Once you become known as a buyer, like we were in the 90s, sometimes these types of transactions will be offered to you. And one of the main lessons in this transaction today is sometimes when they're offered to you and they don't quite fit, and you use the discipline to stick to your parameters, stick to what works for you. Even when it's close, you don't do it, right? You need it to fit your formula. You need it to work for you. And when you say no, and it doesn't go together, or you make the offer at your maximum, what will fit for you, and they say no, often that transaction will come back to you at some point. And when it comes back to you, this happened a lot to us, when it comes back to you, sometimes it's better than it was before. All right, so this is the situation. We're out there buying properties, and we knew at that time, different market than today, it was harder to sell single-family homes than it is today. So one of the things we decided to do, remember, you're a small business, you can react to the marketplace. We decided to try to create cash flow from duplexes, triplexes, and other buildings, try to get those things purchased low and get them rented up and create some cash flow and move on to get the next one. And we're going to show you how to do that. I know some of you just want to buy and sell, and that's good too. All right, you can do both. You can do a little bit of both. But even if your goal is to buy and sell and you get a chance for an income producing situation, it's smart to get that transaction if you know what it's worth. If income properties are in demand, you need to know how to grab it lower, get it running right. Often an income producing property buyer, like a duplex, is buying a cash flow. He doesn't really want it the way you got it. Maybe you got it cheap because it was all beat up, and you fixed it up and you rented it out. So here's the situation on this particular purchase. This is a fun one. We were approached by a broker and an owner. The owner was a doctor. He had pulled all his money out of this project. It was 21 duplexes. 18 of them basically on one street. There was a little side street there too, but it's 18 of them on one street. Just a little bit over, one street down, there's 3 more, and there were single-family homes on there. He didn't own those. But we were able to buy these 21 duplexes in one purchase, 42 units. But when it was first offered to us, my partner, who's very savvy, remember I ended up partnering with someone in town that I thought knew more than I did, smart play. What you're going to do is look this situation over, he says, and we're going to figure this thing out. So he looks it over. He ends up walking the property with the broker and the owner, and they want $150,000 and take over the existing financing on this property. And I should tell you that the doctor pulled his money out at some point years before this, and then he let these things run down as he took that money apparently and maybe built a smaller building, an office building of some kind towards the downtown. But bottom line is he pulled his money out of these properties. And he was letting them kind of dilapidate. I think out of 42 units, 21 buildings, 2 units each, 42 units total. I think only 6 were occupied. And a couple of those might have been illegally occupied, squatters. I think there was even an extension cord running from one of the legal units, taking their power over to another unit, someone squatting in there and using some power, right? So a very bad situation, and that's why it was brought to our attention. This area was surrounded by single-family homes that had a neighborhood watch organization, and they soon realized that all of their problems were coming from these 2 streets, from these 21 duplexes that were not maintained, and in fact many of them were boarded up. We only had, remember, 6 occupied out of 42 as I recall. So they figured out who the lender was, happened to be a local lender. You don't see that as much in today's market, that's one of the differences. But in the 90s, there were more local lenders that had money at risk in our marketplace. As you know, this loan debacle that we've just been through, most lenders lent money and sold it off, and they're basically the servicer now. They're not the lender. They don't get to make decisions like this bank got to make. So putting pressure on them probably doesn't help. All right? But the neighborhood watch was putting pressure on a local bank that had the financing. They were putting pressure on the owner. They wanted this problem cleaned up. All right? And that's how we got contacted. We were cleaning up problems. We were buying properties that were boarded up. Word got out. All right? So my partner walks us with them and tells them, you know what, we can take over the loan, but we can't give you any money. You already took your money. You know, to give us a chance of success, there's no way we're going to give them 150 grand and take over this mess. You see, we were going to have to rehab all those properties. Probably, I think it was 18 or 19 out of 21 were going to need a roof. They had the old wood shake roofs that were peeling up and looking bad, and you know, these things were built in the 60s. So, and this was the 90s. So there was a lot of properties that needed a lot of work, and we knew that. So it ends up being a big no. I think the doctor and the broker were even mad, you know, because we weren't willing to do that. We weren't willing to give them 150 grand and take over the existing loan. Well, it was at least 6 months later, and it might have been even more. I don't really recall. I have to ask my brother and my partner someday for more details. But the basics are, at some point we were contacted back. At this point, the bank had it. With the pressure, with the phone calls, with the letters. Things were not looking good. And the bank could easily just foreclose on these properties and take the whole mess themselves, but they didn't want that. You know, banks don't want properties. They would like to get their loan paid. They would like to do something in that area, but they don't really want to own the property. That's why whenever they take one back, they just list it with an agent, right? They're trying to recoup some of the loan, but they don't want the property. All right? So we end up getting contacted back. And now the lender is willing to write the loan down. Remember, we were willing to take over that loan. We weren't willing to give the seller any money. The deal had gotten better. That's the point I'm trying to make, is they wanted to know if we would take over that loan, if they could write the loan down, $400,000. You know, well, it went together. And we're able to buy those 21 duplexes with very little out of pocket. But we knew we were going to have to come up with a lot of money to close, not to close the deal, but to fix up the properties. So bottom line is it worked out to somewhere in the neighborhood of $55,000 per duplex. Probably at the time, we probably thought they were worth 90, maybe a little bit more. I could figure it out with a calculator. Back then you could get about 12 times the rent, annual rent. That's called a gross rent multiplier. I'm going to do an entire video on duplexes, so don't worry about that right now. Dig into that one later and we'll get you some real details. But bottom line is they were worth a lot more than $55,000 per building, fixed up. But we knew we had a lot of work to do there. I believe the total work on those properties came out to $160,000. And I remember we got a letter from the Neighborhood Watch organization that started off talking about the noise on that street. the noise of all that work going on, it went on to say that it was music to their ears. So there again, remember I've taught you before, and I'm going to continue to teach you this message, is when you solve problems in real estate, that's when you get paid, right? You have a positive outlook, you're solution oriented, you're win-win oriented, you want to make sure you're winning, you want to make sure the other party's winning as well. In this case, the doctor getting out of this thing for any amount of money is a win. The lender getting a new owner that's going to take care of the properties and fix them up and rent them all to hopefully good tenants is also a win. The Neighborhood Watch organization, they're really responsible for making this whole thing go. They just wouldn't stop complaining. They were going to complain until this thing got done. So they sent us a nice letter saying that it was music to their ears. I mean, we were tearing roofs off. You know, we were tearing up carpet, tearing up bathrooms and kitchens and putting them all back together. Remember, these were built in the 60s, mid-60s. They needed a lot of work. A lot of deferred maintenance, we would call that. I remember one of the things that impressed me was there was fruitless mulberry trees in front of every unit. So every building had 2 of these giant trees. And those trees, as you might know, if you live in an area that has these trees, they grow really rapidly. The reason people like them around here is they provide a lot of shade. But they need to be trimmed. You know, a lot of them, you can trim them back once a year and they'll just come in full again. I'm pretty convinced the doctor never had these trees trimmed. I remember pulling onto the street. We took out every other tree up and down this street and trimmed all the other ones back. I remember going out there to check on the progress one day, and when I turned the corner and I could see blue sky down this street, it just looked completely different. These trees were so big and so overgrown, I don't think you could see the sky. They were just almost touching in the middle, I think. You know, they were just giant and covered up so much of the properties and so much of the view looking down the street. It just looked completely different, and it looked fresh, and things were starting to come together. And after replacing all those roofs that needed to be replaced and getting these things done, it took a long time. We had a lot of money, but bottom line is we fixed them all up. We held them about 3 years. About 3 years later, we at that point owned some large apartment complexes, and it occurred to me it was easier to own and operate a large apartment complex, you know, even the big one. It takes up 12 acres and 280 units. It was easier to operate that than it was to operate these 21 duplexes. It seemed like there were calls every day. And we had managers, but we were managing the managers. We even had an electrical fire a couple days before Christmas one time, and I was the one that had to be out there that night, you know, in the rain, and taking some tenants that weren't real happy to a hotel and using my credit card to get them some rooms for the night, and then finding them a place to move to the next day on the same street. We had a couple vacancies where they could move to, but we couldn't get it done that night. I remember one side was very upset because the fire wasn't on their side, but there was enough smoke damage that the fire department wouldn't let them stay there that night, you know. So these things happen sometimes when you're a landlord, but I decided, and I think we decided together over time, that we wanted to get rid of some of our smaller properties because the bigger ones were running so much better, so much more efficient, and it took me 14 months to sell all 21 duplexes. I wasn't successful in finding someone to buy all of them. I did find a few people that bought 2 or bought 3, but I couldn't find anybody to buy them all. We averaged out, I guess you could call it, selling them around 120,000, and the last one's probably closed about 124, 125, for an average of about 122, pretty good increase over 55,000. Now, that was just before the market got hot and ran. You know, some math that I don't like to do sometimes, but it doesn't really matter. We did well. If somebody would have told me these things would run up to over 350,000 in an overheated market that ran from 2000 to 2005, 5 or 6 in that area, I would have laughed at them. I would have never thought that these things would go over 350 grand, but they did. Probably the highest sale was close to 400,000, if it wasn't 400,000. People were paying $400,000 for a duplex at the top of our market. Now, from my point of view, I knew that wouldn't work. I knew that would never work. I knew that, as a matter of fact, I used to say, if you could find me 10 buyers who bought a duplex in that overheated market and put them in a room, I would ask them one question and I'd put $10,000 on the table. If more than, I'd say, I'm guessing none of them would know the answer, but I'd be shocked if more than 2 people knew the answer out of 10. And that is, I would ask them, what's GRM? What's a gross rent multiplier? And I'm betting you that these people bought with no knowledge at the top of a market The properties could never support the loan that they got. They only thought that the market was just going to keep going up. Remember the mentality of the new folks out there at that time. Real estate was on fire. It was going straight up. These folks actually thought they could pay $400,000 for a duplex and sell it for $500,000 the next year or two. And as we know, they came crashing back down. It's my guess that on this particular street, probably the retail value today is around $149. If you're lucky, you get $159, but probably not more than that. Probably not more than that. So a GRM is a gross rent multiplier, where you take the property's income, the gross amount it brings in per side, you add them together, multiply by 12, and that's your gross rent. In Sacramento County, for many, many years, you could get 12 times your rent, was a good benchmark. At the top of the silly market, where things were overheated, people were paying 22 times gross rent. I'm telling you, they never worked at that value. And we'll go into that heavy on the details of the duplexes. I've got 4 of them right now that I'm going to sell. And we're lucky now to get 8 times our gross rent, 7 to 8 times gross rent. My thought is it probably will bounce back at some point and be 12. So anything you can buy now that pays you every month, you're getting paid to wait. All right? You're getting paid to wait. I could just keep these 4 duplexes if I'd like and wait. And I could get paid to wait. They cash flow. But I have other reasons why I want to sell them right now. And we'll go into that in another video. All right? I'm not selling them because I believe they're going down. I think they're going up. But I have other plans. All right? And we'll get into that at some point. You'll make decisions all the time based on how many you have going on, what you already have. You know, I've already got the big complexes and all that. So you'll make decisions on that. But the bottom line of this story is it just points out what's possible. You know, you started off doing a little house deal. Maybe you did a duplex. Someday are you going to do a bulk buy like this, 21 duplexes, all at one time, pay around $55,000 a building, sell them around 120, 122 average? That would be good for you. It would be good for your family. Maybe you do something different. We'll talk about this. Maybe you buy 20 duplexes, the market heats up, you sell off 10 of them, and keep 10 free and clear. You use the proceeds from the 10 sale to pay off the other ones 10 free and clear. What if you had 10 free and clear duplexes? In my area, it'd be about $18,000 to $20,000 a month with no payments on those buildings. Sure, you'll have other expenses, you'll have property taxes, you'll have some things like that, you'll have maintenance, but you have no loan payments. You could keep those in your family trust forever. Maintain the buildings and keep them forever. Just one of many, many different techniques we're going to talk about. The way I envision this training website is you're going to have your core training, which is done here. You're going to have your on-site training, which is going to be at my various transactions that I have going now, where I just bring you along and I teach you the beginning of the transaction, the middle, and the end. And then we're going to have this inspirational stories and actual stories of deals that I've done in the past. You can learn from every one of those areas. Learn from the core training in here. Learn from the on-site location. Learn from the history. You know, that's what basically what I have to offer is this 25 years of transactions, over 1,000 deals, and many, many lessons, and I'm still learning. I'm going to pass those on to you. This stuff is exciting for me. I hope it's exciting for you. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.